Hello, everyone. And here we are with another episode of Authorize by Amazing Workplaces. For those watching us for the first time, Authorize, the show is all about authors and books. In today's session of Authorize, we are going to speak to Cornelia Gamlem, an award winning author. Cornelia Gamlem is passionate about helping organizations develop and maintain respectful workplaces. For that reason, she used the HR expertise that she gained through her experience of working for a Fortune 500 IT services company and founded the GEMS Group, a management consulting firm offering client solutions to employee relations, workplace diversity, and related HR and business issues. Cornelia, along with her colleague Barbara Mitchell, has authored 5 books in the HR and workplace space. The Big Book of HR was the beginning of Cornelia's and Barbara's writing partnership. Since that time, they have gone on to write the Essential Workplace Conflict Handbook, the Conflict Resolution Phrase Book, the award winning The Manager's Answer Book, and the latest amongst them all, They Did What? Unbelievable Tales from the Workplace. Today, we shall be speaking to Cornelia about They Did What? A book about unbelievable tales from the workplace. They Did What is an extremely creative narration of real life workplace incidents. Through this book, Barbara and Cornelia use their expert storytelling techniques to show a glimpse into what happens in organizations, often behind the scenes, and how managers and HR professionals deal with the gray areas of work. It depicts the amazingly difficult challenges and complex issues human resources and business leaders often encounter daily. Well, before I tell you further about this interesting book, let's welcome Cornelia herself and hear what she has to say about They Did What. Welcome, Cornelia, to Authorize, the show about authors by Amazing Workplaces. I'm super excited for this conversation and thank you so much for taking out the time to talk to us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a real pleasure, especially given our time zone difference. I'm glad we were able to make this work. I'm speaking to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico in the United States. And I know we had to wrangle a little bit to make sure we had good times for both of us to be together. But, having worked for a global organization, it really wasn't that difficult for me because I was kind of used to, dealing with people from around the globe.
I'm sure there's so much to learn from somebody who comes with such a vast experience. And, today, in fact, I think it would be really fun knowing how you stumbled upon the idea of writing such an interesting book on workplaces. Yeah. So, Cornelia, your latest book, They Did What? Unbelievable Tales from the Workplace, has stories about employee misbehavior. Well, I'm getting a little inquisitive after writing books like The Big Book of HR and The Essential Workplace Conflict Handbook. What made you choose employee misbehavior as a subject for your latest book?
Part of my background that led me to write this book is I had a long history, and I still do some work in the field of human resources, HR. And I had found my way into the profession, starting as a recruiter, like so many people do, but then somehow migrated into employee relations and realized that was really where my passion was, because I enjoyed helping the organization to craft, policies and practices and put programs in place that assured, we maintained our very, very strong workplace culture. And, at the same time, had the opportunity to help solve problems, to deal with a lot of different employee issues and, guide some of my colleagues through working through those issues. And then I took all of that expertise off on my own, after the corporate world started to wear on me a little bit, as I think it does with so many people, and started consulting and just, started moving in the same direction though, and doing the same kinds of work, except now I had the opportunity to do it for a variety of different organizations. And, I think the part that I enjoy the most is problem solving, because there are so many problems and issues that come up in organizations. And as you kind of alluded to, there's that gray area of work. And sometimes these issues are not always black and white. I've heard people say, well, it's an employee harassment issue, and what can be so difficult? Well, sometimes there's subtleties in people's behavior, and you really have to kind of dig down a little bit further to say what was truly going on here, and how do we move, go forward and resolve the situation and address it. So it's never a one size fits all approach when you're dealing with employee behavior. I had been teaching an HR course in one of the colleges, and I used to live in the Washington, D.C. area. And at the end of class one time, we had been doing a segment on employee relations, and this woman came up to me and said, there's a lot of good information in the material, but how do you really learn employee relations? And I kind of looked at her and said, well, you kind of master some of the information we had around, policies and, the external environment and how organizations have to deal with that, to be able to put programs in place. I said, but really at the heart of employee relations, and what I think you're talking about, is you've got to deal with the behavior at work. And that just takes practice. It's not something you can just pick up a book and say, all right, start here, go here. Even when you look at policies, there may be a progressive discipline policy, but you still have to take into account everything that has gone on, and whether or not people have been with the organization for a long time, and how have you dealt with this issue in the past. So I just, I kind of walked away from that discussion and not really gave it a whole lot more thought. Well, fast forward a couple of years, and you mentioned when Barbara and I began writing together, the first book we wrote is The Big Book of HR, which I actually have a copy of that sitting right here. But we set out to write a book that was kind of encompassed all of the different functional areas of human resources. And I had sort of put the employee relations chapter off last, because I go, well, I know employee relations cold. How hard is that going to be? Well, I found out I struggled, not so much because I didn't know what to put into it. There was so much I wanted to put into it. And that and we only had limited amount of space, even though it's the big book of HR. You still, we had a word count that we had to adhere to. But then that conversation came back to me from that woman who was saying, how do you learn it? And it was like this aha moment that I had. Why don't we write a book where we tell stories around some of the behavioral issues that occur in the workplace, and how perhaps they were solved, what went right, what went wrong, but we've got to do it in a creative way. So we got the big book of HR done, we got the manuscript off, and I said to Barbara, what do you think about this as an idea? And she's going, hey, I think that's great. So we set out a plan. We started to kind of figure out how we would go about doing this, and laid some groundwork, and then decided the best thing to do was to not just use our own experiences, but to also talk to a bunch of our colleagues, because everybody's got stories. I mean, you sit around with at any kind of an HR event, and you're with other HR professionals, and sooner or later the conversation's going to get to, you're not going to believe what happened to me, or I'm struggling with this issue. And so we knew that there was a lot of stories out there. We had a couple of different goals in mind for writing this book. First, something that an HR professional or a frontline manager can use, so they can pick it up and say, first of all, gee, this happens in other organizations, not just ours, but also to to give them some guidance, to make them recognize that there is not one single cookie cutter approach to dealing with even a similar type of problem, because different organizations have different policies, have different cultures, and the situations themselves change. As I mentioned earlier, not all harassment issues are the same. They don't sound the same. They don't act the same, because people act out differently in the workplace.
Thank you, Cornelia. Thank you so much for answering and letting us know how you actually started thinking about this book and what led you to actually write book on employee misbehavior. So, Cornelia, we were going through some reviews of your book on Amazon, and we see that people who have read your book find it thought-provoking, entertaining, extremely informative, and really engrossing. In fact, one person has mentioned that they could not actually put the book down until they had finished it, and as late as 2 a.m. Your unique and entertaining way to discuss management styles and suggestions to deal with everyday yet difficult situations in the workplace, ranging from sex in the workplace, bullying, transgender individuals, and use of drugs at the workplace. All these have been really appreciated. So can I ask you, why did you choose the genre of creative nonfiction for your book?
I think you hit on it when you talked about that one review. Somebody had written, it's the only business book, it's the only HR book that I couldn't put down until 2 a.m. in the morning. And she was so taken, she had reached out to us and just so taken with this different style. And we said, that was exactly what we were trying to do. And getting back to what we had said earlier, storytelling is sometimes the best way to learn, because people can become engaged. They sort of get absorbed in the characters and the story. And then it's I can't put this book down, rather than just presenting something as a dry case study. So that was our first task. Let's start to gather stories. Let's see if, as we talk to people, we start to see some themes coming out, which is exactly what happened. And then, we can add some of our own stories in where we've seen some of these themes. But the biggest challenge for us, well, we originally thought this is going to be easy, because we just have to write up the stories. We realize we're writing a different kind of a book now. We're writing creative nonfiction. It needs to read like a novel, even though we didn't make up the stuff. We fictionalized portions of the story because we wanted to make sure that we were preserving the confidentiality. So we might have gotten several stories around the same theme, and we would just kind of mix and match. We'd take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and put it together for a story that went into the book. And in fact, we were always concerned with people going to see this and realize it. And I was talking to a former colleague who had read the book, and she said, well, gee, you never put this story in there. And I said, oh yeah, it's there. I said, and you just paid us the biggest compliment, because you're now telling us that we were able to mask a lot of these stories. So our challenge became learning more how to write like a fiction author, learning about characters and the narrative arc, and being able to put all of that together so we could end up not so much with something that looked like a novel, although people have told us it reads like a novel, but it's really like a series of short stories that have the same characters in it. We created a fictitious company, and we created fictitious characters, through whom we could tell some of these stories. But the stories are all grounded in some level of reality, that they're really things that happened in organizations. It's creative nonfiction kind of is in that same genre where you may twist the facts a little bit. It's not totally factual in that the story actually played out the way it did. But we wanted to add some suspense to some of the stories, or sometimes we'd have 2 or 3 stories that were similar, and it was easy to bring them together. But presenting some of these stories in more of a conversational style, and having, the backdrop and the scenario of what happened, and how people came to have this kind of an issue in the workplace. One of the stories that we talk about is somebody who had used his personal social media account, but had his employer listed on it. And it created, he put something on there that some people took offense to and started calling the organization. And somehow something that was totally a personal issue became a workplace problem. So, trying to put that in the context of how things will bubble up at work when that really wasn't the intention. And while the facts weren't the same, that's actually a story that one of our colleagues had encountered. And so it was something that was very similar. So, we chose this genre because we thought it was a good way to be able to tell stories and put dialogue in there and just keep, maintain people's interest.
So, Cornelia, now coming to the most important question, which I'm sure all the viewers must be curious to know from you directly, is how did you come up with the stories for the book? So you mentioned in the beginning that, you were talking to your colleagues and some were your own personal experience. But if you can just, kind of share more details about the stories in your book. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as I had mentioned, we did, we came up with a list of colleagues, and people that we knew that had a diverse background in HR, so that they were bound to have certainly come across some of these kinds of issues. And, we just sat down with them and said, okay, tell us some of the most challenging situations that you've ever had to deal with in the workplace as an HR professional or as a manager, because we did talk to people who had never worked in HR, but they had been in managerial roles. And, just walk us through, tell us what happened. And, we didn't necessarily say, well, did you ever have a situation that involved sex in the workplace, for example? Just tell us your most challenging situations. And they were so forthcoming. I mean, we as we wrote in the book, we can't name you as we would love to in the acknowledgments, because we don't want to betray your identities, but you know who you are, and you just gave us such good information and such good stories. And getting a lot of their stories, and and then asking them, how was it resolved, what was one of the key factors for us in being able to start to frame the book and say, yes, there's a pattern here, but not every situation is handled exactly the same way. And also to be able to look at it and say, okay, one of the things we stumbled on was, do we have to tell the story exactly as they told it to us? And then we realized, no, we really don't. And that's where we can take some creative license. But we really owe a debt of gratitude to so many of the people that were willing to share their stories and their frustrations and their challenges with us.
Basically, people are very apprehensive about sharing these life experiences, especially when they know that it's going to form a part of a book, because everybody is scared about disclosing identities. Workplaces are very sensitive places, and so I'm glad that you had those kind of people who were willing to trust you with that information and to share their information, which could be scripted in the form of a book. And I'm sure it's going to help a lot of people who want to read that book and understand workplace misbehavior issues and complexities, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So, Cornelia, I'm sure you and Barbara must have come across many such stories, and incidents during your career as HR professionals and business leaders. So, tell me one thing: how did you pick and choose the stories that you actually wanted to bring out through this book? I mean, how did you decide which stories to choose and which to ignore?
That's a great question, because I think when we started out, we weren't sure what we were going to get. It was just like, we had the blank slate in front of us, a blank whiteboard, and just thought, well, let's see what people have to tell us. And so, we were probably about, I'm going to say, halfway through the process. And we sat down one day, because we would meet, like on a regular basis, and said, let's start to look at what we have, and some of the themes that were in the stories, because we still at that point weren't sure exactly how the book was going to be shaped. Were we going to write it kind of sequentially, the way you would write a novel, or was it just going to be individual standalone chapters? And so I think I put a spreadsheet together that, I had people's names listed, and then just some of the themes of the book. And we really started to see some patterns coming out. Similar kinds of stories around terminations, around the hiring process, around people drinking in the workplace, and drug abuse. And, as always, you're going to have people misbehaving in a sexual manner. So that yes, there were stories about sex in the workplace and sexual harassment. And it just began, it kind of came together very naturally. And then there was a few places we thought, oh, we have one or two good stories here, but we wanted to incorporate several stories in every chapter. And that's where we would look and say, okay, what have we experienced? There's some of our own stuff that we can put in here, to just, to kind of beef up some of these chapters. Or, as I said earlier, we wanted to make sure that we were camouflaging some of the details, so what wouldn't be too obvious where the story came from. So, I had a story from that one friend had told, or one colleague had told us, and it was about sexual harassment. And but she was a little concerned. She said, if you talk about these details, and I said, oh, don't worry, I have other details that I can put in here. But it was kind of unique in the way this, the situation actually unfolded, and the people that were involved. So, so we were able to do some things like that. And there were some stories that we ended up not using because we might have only had one and didn't really have enough information, and it didn't really fit anywhere else. Our last chapter, what I called, was our potpourri chapter, and we called it just when you thought you've seen everything or heard of everything, and kind of put a couple of those stories that, were that we found to be, okay, this has to be in the book. It's either funny or it's just one of those unbelievable things, and we only heard one of them, so let's kind of put them all together. But one of the other things that we found very interesting was, as we started to see a pattern, we also would hear almost an identical story. I mean, yes, sometimes the facts and figures might have been different, but almost an identical story. And I've told people over and over again, if you think this only happens in your workplace, trust us, we heard the same thing more than once in so many cases.
You created your own jigsaw puzzle, rather, and you started fixing it together and came up with this wonderful, book. There would be different stories, and they would be leading to, each story would have a different message altogether, and different context altogether. Yeah. And putting
Yes,
them, in a storyline where they fit into that story, which, you have created a story of a workplace, which is a restaurant chain. Yeah.
correct.
Yeah. So putting it all together to fit into, look like a, real story, I think that's pretty interesting thing that you have been able to accomplish. I must congratulate you on this.
Thank you. Yeah, and in fact, we had even reached out to some HR colleagues when the book was still in a beta format, and we had a fairly rough draft. I mean, we hadn't refined things, but we said, read through this. What we really want to hear is, did the situation sound believable as we're portraying them in the book, and did the characters sound believable? every one of them came back and said to us, we got a resounding yes. You've really kind of captured the essence of what goes on in the workplace and the challenges that we deal with as HR professionals and as managers.
Right. Is there any specific group of target people for this book? I mean, who are the people to whom this book will appeal to the most?
I always think of another author I know, and she says, "Oh, everybody should read my book." And I go, "Well, yeah, that's true, but you're right. You have to have some kind of a target audience in mind." Certainly, we had HR professionals in mind as a way to, kind of as a learning tool. But beyond that, it's not just a book about what HR has to deal with, because managers have to deal with these issues as well. And in fact, the managers are the ones that are, close and personal, if you will, on a daily basis with their employees. So they're challenged with a lot of these issues. So, we would hope that managers and small business owners who perhaps don't have an HR department and who might feel overwhelmed by some issues would pick this book up and read it and learn some things from it, learn that and appreciate that, you're always going to have some difficult moments when you're dealing with people, but don't let it overwhelm you. It happens to everyone, and it happens in every organization around the world. And, I think in one of the reviews, somebody wrote, "If you've ever worked in an organization, this book is for you." And I thought, oh, thank you so much. But it's true, because a lot of times, employees think they understand something that they've observed in the workplace. They know that somebody's done something wrong, and so many times they question, well, what happened, and why wasn't this person fired? So, we hope that one of the messages comes through too, that so much of what happens with dealing with employees and employee issues really happens below the surface. It's not there for everybody to see. And, it's not necessarily that you're trying to keep things behind closed doors because you don't want to be transparent. You're keeping things behind closed door to preserve the integrity of the situation and to preserve the integrity of the individual that's involved. Some of these issues are very deliberate kinds of behavior, but a lot of times, there are extenuating circumstances that lead people to act out in the workplace. And, there may be medical issues underneath it. And that's not really something that's appropriate to disclose to other coworkers. So, first and foremost, we would hope every HR professional picks up this book and then encourages their managers to read it as well. But there's a lot in this book for just, coworkers to begin to understand the dynamics of what goes on in their organizations.
Right. Okay, Cornelia. So now I would like to see your book, and I'm sure our viewers also want to see the book that we have been talking about. Oh, here it is.
Let me get it right. Here you go.
Great. So here's my message to our viewers. This book by Cornelia and Barbara is not just informative, believe me, and it's also thought-provoking, and it is actually very engrossing, and at the same time, a very useful tool, especially for HR professionals, to understand how to handle workplace misbehavior. So do buy this book. It's available on Amazon, and we have provided the link to the book in the video description below. Do check it out. And if you like this discussion, if you like this conversation that I just had with Cornelia, please do like this video and subscribe to our channel for more such videos. Thank you so much once again. And thank you, Cornelia, for being on Authorize and for speaking to us. It has been a real pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you so much once again.
Ekta, it was a pleasure to be on this today. And I think the work that you're doing with Amazing Workplaces is just so very important. People don't realize often what happens. And, unfortunately, a lot of times if people are disgruntled in the workplace, that's the kind of things they want to talk about, especially on some of these chat rooms and whatever's out there on social media. So I think taking the opportunity to highlight those organizations that are doing great work, and in fact, most organizations do great work. It's just so impactful and so important. And thank you for taking the time to do that.
Thank you, Cornelia. Thank you so much once again for your kind words. Thank you.
You're very welcome.